that's what I can try to do, because they want you to be a productive member of society, but nobody will hire you, so I'll try to do this. And, you know, I spent most of the last 10 years fighting for more money and trying to plan and see what, you know, what I could try for different business things. And like learn, which was good. I learned stuff, but at the same time, like I've lost creative time, which I wanted to use. And I constantly feel like even recently, people just treat my artwork and my work as a disability culture consultant and advocate is just, oh, this guy's just plain grown up or whatever. Because even on Sunday, when I had my school course that I couldn't take through OSAP or anything like that, because when I applied for film school, the writing course online, because I wanted to do it part-time and online, and it was a guy from New Brunswick teaching the course, OSAP won't cover it unless you're on the the property of the school for a certain amount of class time in person. And so I found an alternative, but if it wasn't for even the family supports that I do get and some government assistance, because I have a dual diagnosis, so I can apply for extra programs. And people say I know how to advocate for myself, but it's just because I'm like, well, that's not right. Like, I mean, I was told in high school that I wasn't going to be able to be a writer or really be a filmmaker because my English was horrible. And even when I tried to go to the Toronto Film School thing, because I didn't pass a computerized test that would say I have a grade 12 equivalency, I couldn't take the course. So I can't create, so I can't go the way that the school or the system would like you to go to make it be what they consider credible, but I was able to find an alternative. And I'm very aware of the fact that in an instant, if I was to lose my house, which is accessible, lose my rent geared to income, if I would lose my subsidy, that because if you pay a certain amount of rent and it doesn't go over your maximum, you can apply for extra to cover your cost of your what do you call that?
Your utilities.
Well, I wasn't thinking of utilities, but I was also I was thinking of content insurance.
Yep, like your tenant's insurance. Yep.
Yeah. So
Yep.
so.
Which you have to have if you're in
Tenant
housing.
insurance you're forced to have in Sudbury housing.
Yes.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing. Like, anytime, and here's where it fall apart. If it wasn't for my mom or my cousin or other people helping me cook meals or workers, and even then, even with workers, that can change any time if government funding is changed, whether that's through the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care or the Ministry of Community and Social Services. We constantly, and I not that I skip meals, but I'm not a big, I don't always eat the way you should, and diabetes runs in my family, so even since my 20s, it's always been like, okay, I can scrimp a little bit to save up for this goal, and then, yeah, I'll eat better when I get older, because I don't want to get diabetes, but I mean, it's like you know, it's almost like I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul, except I'm both. Anyway,
Yeah,
so
like he can,
questions?
like,
And I think too, like what you're talking about is I think what resonates with me, you talked about having to fight for everything,
Mhm.
right? So fighting for, basic fighting for a shelter, like fighting for those things where, so I come from a labor perspective, right? So I am one of the folks that does the approvals, right, through Ontario Works. So Chancey's also works in Ontario Works as well. So there's been a big culture shift. I would say probably in the past 6 or 7 years, there's been a huge culture shift around coming back to the how can I help?
Yeah.
Right? So rather than being the holder of that money, it's, seems like you need some new shoes. Let's talk about that. Are you doing something that we can, and this comes from an Ontario Works perspective, not an ODSP perspective, but I'll share some ODSP stuff in a little bit. But I think part of it is like, you feel like you're constantly in that fight mode, right? So having that interaction, you're like, okay, well, I have to over-represent myself, I have to oversell, I have to, so that I can get what I need. But in reality, if somebody just said, hey Mark, how can I help? You'd be like, well, I'm looking to do this course, but I'm struggling because I can't figure out how that actually impacts me.
By the way, also important, when I've applied for doing when I applied way back in I was in my 20s. I applied way back I went to ODSP. I said, I'd like to access part of my employment startup to take a business course that is local here in town. It's called Learning Initiative.
Yep.
I think it's still around. And back then, I don't know if this was correct or not, but I didn't know how to take it or how to do it back then. But back then, my worker was like, I'm going to call her Tammy. It's not her name, but
That's okay.
Tammy, I went to her, I said, look, all I know is I want to do my art stuff. I know I want to do videos, and I got to kind of build a brand. That's all I know. And I got to find myself. So she said, I can't approve you to take this course because I can only approve you to take this course if I think it's something that can make me money.
And I think I struggle with that because that personal judgment of that individual doesn't mean it's not viable.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a viable option, and it's going to look different for each person.
And here's the thing, I struggle to use names of rich people because nowadays they're like, that guy sucks. But here's the thing, we always praise in North America these people that, they're a self-made man, to quote a little bit of a book, a section from the book I'm listening to right now, there is no such thing as a self-made man or woman, because you either all know somebody or somebody will point you in the direction of, oh, there's this tax program, there's this thing. So somebody says to you they're a self-made man, yes, okay, they knew to access something that somebody pointed them to, but you're not self-made.
And sometimes it's just dumb luck.
Yep.
To be very honest, right? And the approach that I take with folks is, I could be 1 or 2 life experiences or decisions from actually making an application for social assistance. Right? We don't know we don't know if there's going to be an injury at work, we don't know if we're going to experience, a short-term illness, a long-term illness, we don't know, there could be job loss, we don't know what that looks like. So we need to be very, very conscious of treating everybody with dignity and respect.
Can I ask you?
Your turn.
I'm gonna ask you one thing, and then I'm gonna also point out one thing that I have to say, just because I'm realizing it more and more in my personal recovery, is the fact that, and somebody touched on it, and I'm kind of turning towards her because we're all talking here.
Yeah.
Somebody touched on it in here about relationships, but also, how do you find yourself? How do you find a relationship? How do you find who you are? I mean, I'm not trying to sound preachy, but we should all be evolving. I just kind of figured that out like a little while ago. You're never not changing, right? But like, how do you even, like, I just remember the feeling of, and I kind of said it earlier, of like, okay, if I could just get this amount of money to buy a video camera, or just get this amount of money to buy, I don't know, like an editing program. But then the problem is, over the last 10 years, between fighting for my rights as a tenant and stuff, is also the fact that to pay for the help to fill out the human rights complaints that takes money out of my work that I wanted to do. But I'm also learning because of that. But also, how do I find myself, or find a partner, or find what I believe in, or build myself if I'm constantly on a treadmill but not going anywhere?
I think you hit it when you said, it's the change, right? There's so much change. And I think the thing that I come to reflect on is change is the only constant.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So sometimes that can be very difficult to navigate, especially if change is uncomfortable or difficult, right? If you're somebody that thrives on routine and thrives on knowledge and understanding, and then something gets thrown at you, you're like, oh, guess what? You got a new worker. Like,
Yeah.
That happened today.
Oh, Mark is a perfect example
Right.
of that. We've gone into his apartment and wanted to rearrange it, and he was like, no, I don't know what's happening here, and then once we changed it, he was okay with it. But just the concept of change,
It's
or even asking him to help him go through his stuff, oh my God,
I'll
it's,
give a really interesting
Yeah.
example of this.
I've been there,
So
done that.
my grandmother and my grandfather, they were married since 1950. They lived in the same farmhouse my grandfather was born in. They lived there their entire married life. My grandmother raised 7 children in that home. She fed farmhands, they farmed, that was what they did. My grandmother started declining with Alzheimer's and dementia. So not to the point where she had to be in a care facility, but enough where they wanted to make some changes in the home to make it easier to navigate. So somebody, came in and was like, oh, I got this. That's always my most nervous thing. When somebody's like, I got this. And I'm like,
no, you
I don't
don't.
have to announce that to the world. So I think, and they came in and they actually moved all of the pots and pans, and they were trying to be helpful, right? She was getting older, didn't want to bend for lower cabinets, so they moved stuff around. But the stuff had been in the same place for 80 years. So they weren't able, so it was one of those good intentions doesn't always equal positive impact, right? So we can have the best intentions, but it doesn't mean it's gonna hit or land well.
Exactly.
I wanted to throw that number. The other thing I wanted to throw at you was that number that you threw at me, because I had somebody say, no, it can't be that much. Are you sure it's not $1 million?
I'm sure.
And
I think you did some.
I know you're sure.
Yeah.
And I believe you, because I asked you if I misheard it, because
No.
somebody corrected me.
Yeah.
But no, tell them what you told
So
me,
this,
or Ron told
yeah,
us.
so this came from Ron. We all had a little quick meeting. Emily, myself, Ron, who was in the video, he was me, and Mark. After you were done with your other meeting, you jumped on to the next one. And we were just chatting just about kind of what this could look like. And I think part of it is, Chancey's kind of seen me speak a few times. I like a really informal environment. I can do the lecture thing, but I don't enjoy it. I'd rather you be like, from my understanding, it's this. And it's like, well, actually, and you're like, oh.
Yeah.
And now you're like, that makes so much more sense.
Mhm.
I like to talk about myths and dispel myths, but so Ron was talking about the concept of that $200 payment that Doug Ford was talking about issuing to folks in the new year.
Yeah.
It's going to cost about $3.2 billion to do it. On the flip side of that, if they were to actually just double social assistance rates, it only costs $1 billion. So it makes a living, I'm just gonna use living wage.
Mhm.
I think that's, we'll just say living wage, over the poverty line, get $200, versus they could actually save $2.2 billion and just double social assistance rates.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's actually a cost savings, and then they talk about legacy costs, right? So they talk about the cost to healthcare system. They talk about, well, if I don't get my teeth cleaned, and then we're no longer in that preventative state, and we're in that reactionary emergency state.
So
Right.
is there voting coming up for Doug Ford?
There has not been an election writ.
The guaranteed date is June 2026, however, rumor has it that he wants one next spring. In order
Yeah,
to
he's
stay
been
in office,
pushing,
because we
yeah.
all know, it's always the opposite as federal.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, statistically, yeah. Were you
Because
at
some
the
of
meeting?
some of those elections, like I hear Pierre, oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to
Well-
stop crime rate. I'm going to increase housing. It's like,
So-
seriously?
However,
However,
Yeah.
would we like to know a little bit about him?
Yes.
He only created 6,000 units.
He's a lawyer. That's it. He's a snake,
So-
he's a lawyer.
How about the fact that he is not a self-made person?
Mhm.
He voted against
Everything.
every social program improvement
Yeah.
throughout his entire existence within public service. And I don't want to say public service because that's not even a good term for him. But basically the idea is the rich will get richer and the poor will starve.
Well, see, and I'm saying like,
He's talking
seriously,
about this, like,
you
concept
can't
stuff.
make more housing.
No.
You can't stop crime.
Yep.
You know, that's what I was getting at. Not that I agree with his platform. I think it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, and that's what they always do when it comes election time.
But I think that's where we need to think about how we can use our ballots, how we can use our voices, how we can advocate, how we can connect as well. Because that's a really important feature of Sudbury. I'm actually really excited to relocate to Sudbury, and there's a couple reasons why. So I come from down south, originally, like born and raised. I come from like a blue conservative, like
Stop.
Probably blue.
deep rural blue. And I'm really excited to be more focused in a labor town. Right, so we've got NDP folks, we've got some folks that are actually running for, that are approved candidates for the NDP that come from our union, which is the Canadian Union for Public Employees.
Yeah,
So
QP.
yes, that's right. So there's some really great people that we can put in power local, like to represent us locally, that also we're going to take those issues forward.
Mhm.
So it's 7:40 if you're.
I was just wondering.
Curious on the
'cause
time there.
I was just curious because they can be treated.
Yeah, so we're 7:40, so we've got a bit of flexibility. But yeah, I think it's important that we think about how we can leverage our votes. And and I think too, like for folks like me who are doing the work, we're working within the system to leverage the opportunities within the legislation. I can tell you I approve all the things.
Okay, so here's a quick question.
Yep.
From me, because maybe this will get them thinking too. Like, what do we do? We can't ignore people feeling misrepresented for a lot of years,
Yep.
and that's what leads to radicalism, even with people in the disability community.
Yeah.
I tried to share this event poster in an ODSP related group that claims to want to protect ODSP. And when I shared it today, they messaged me. They weren't going to share this ODSP action propaganda. We're in the pocket of the government, blah, blah, blah. I can tell you, I'm a member of the ODSP Action Coalition. We'll meet with people. We'll meet with anybody.
Well, and
But
that's
we're not in the pocket of anybody.
And I think
as
that's
far as
the
I know.
idea behind the
I
coalition.
think I know who you're talking about, and I hear you, like, she accuses the ODSP Action Coalition of being ableist, this
Yeah.
individual, and
Yeah.
it was like her idea originally doubling ODSP rates, and now that it's trending, she says that they're finally agreeing to it, and I'm like, well, no, that's not how it goes.
No, and I think one of the things to remember too is that ODSP rates, there's now the inflation piece with ODSP rates,
Yeah.
but that didn't happen for Ontario Works,
No,
Right.
right? So there has been a little bit, I'm not saying it's sufficient, but there's been a little bit of movement with the ODSP rates, but because I think the public perception is ODSP, you have to qualify into it, right? Versus Ontario Works, you have to qualify, but you just have to make an application, versus ODSP, you actually have to be found as a person with a disability.
And,
Right, so there seems to be kind of that stigma around the